Everything Rosario Vega owned at 62 years old fit inside one suitcase and a cardboard box. She had been left with that, and with a set of directions to a place no one believed was worth the trip. Welcome to Historias Entre Vidas. The road to the old Villanueva ranch in the hills above Nombre de Dios, Durango, was not a road so much as a memory of one. Two worn tracks through the dry grass where wheels had passed so many years ago that the mesquite had started to close in from both sides. It was the last week of October, and the Sierra smelled of cold earth and pine, and the particular quiet that comes just before winter settles into the mountains for good. Rosario stood at the top of the last rise and looked down at what she had inherited, a wooden ranch house. Not adobe, not stone. Wood, the way they rarely built anymore, with a long porch running the full length of the front and two posts holding up a roof that sagged on the left side like a shoulder that had been carrying too much for too long. The yard was full of dry weeds. A peach tree grew beside the house, a duraznero old enough to have seen 3 generations come and go, and its bare branches in the late October light looked like hands open and waiting. She stood there for a long moment. Then she picked up her suitcase and her cardboard box and walked down. She had not come here by choice. She had come here because choice had run out. 4 months earlier, Rosario had been living in the house in Guadalupe where she and her husband Ernesto had raised their 3 children. Ernesto had been gone 11 years, and for 11 years Rosario had kept the house clean and paid the taxes on it, and grown tomatoes in the back garden, and attended Sunday Mass, and asked God for nothing she did not need. She had not been a burden to anyone. She had not asked her children for a single peso. But in June, her eldest son Hector had sat down across from her at the kitchen table with a man he introduced as a business associate. The man's name was Licenciado Fuentes. He had soft hands and a leather briefcase, and the particular smile of someone who has already decided the outcome of a conversation before it begins. Hector explained that the neighborhood was changing, that a developer was building a residential complex 2 streets over, that the house, if sold now, would yield enough for Rosario to live comfortably in a small apartment near Hector's family in the city, with money left over. That this was the sensible thing, the practical thing. The thing a reasonable woman would do. Licenciado Fuentes set a contract on the table, already filled out, already signed on his end. Rosario looked at the contract. She looked at her son. She looked at the kitchen where she had made tortillas every morning for 31 years. "This house was your father's," she said. Hector cleared his throat. "Ma'am, the house is worth 4 times what it was worth 10 years ago. This is an opportunity." "I didn't ask about its worth," she said quietly. "I asked whose it was." Licenciado Fuentes leaned forward. "Señora, with the greatest respect, a woman alone in a house this size is not practical. Maintenance, security, property taxes going up every year." He paused. "We are offering you a solution." She did not sign that day, but by August, after Hector had stopped calling, after her daughter-in-law had told a mutual friend that Rosario was being stubborn and selfish, after the property tax notice arrived with a number that made her stomach drop, she had signed. She had packed the suitcase and the cardboard box. And she had called the only other number she had left to call. A notary in Nombre de Dios, Durango, who informed her that her late husband's great-aunt, a woman named Doa Catalina Villanueva, had died the previous winter and left, in a handwritten testament witnessed by 2 neighbors, the old Villanueva ranch and its 40 surrounding acres to the wife of Ernesto Vega, should she ever need it. She needed it now. The door of the ranch house was not locked. It swung open with a push, and the smell that came out was of dry wood and thyme, and something faintly sweet that Rosario could not immediately place. The inside was one large room with a smaller room off the back. There was a wood-burning stove in the corner, a table with 2 chairs, a shelf with nothing on it, and a cot with a bare mattress that had seen better years. On the wall, someone had nailed a small wooden cross that still had a dried palm frond from some long ago Palm Sunday woven through it. She set her suitcase down. She set the cardboard box on the table. She did not know yet that 40 feet from the back door, beneath a heavy flat stone in the dry bed of a seasonal creek, there was something that would change what she understood about that piece of land entirely. She did not know it yet. But she would. That first night she slept in her coat on the cot, with the cold coming through the boards and the coyotes calling somewhere distant in the hills, and she did not sleep well. But she did not cry either. Rosario Vega had cried enough in her life that she had learned to recognize the moments when crying solved nothing and rest might. The next morning she was up before the light. She found a small store of firewood stacked under the porch overhang, dry enough to catch. She lit the stove. She found, on the shelf above the stove, a tin of coffee grounds sealed with a rubber band, left by someone, recently enough that it still smelled right. She made coffee in the battered pot she found hanging on a nail, and she sat at the table with both hands around the cup and watched the light come into the valley below through the porch's open door. It was in that first quiet morning that she found the notebook. Not right away. She found it when she went to clear the shelf, which was not a shelf so much as a plank nailed between 2 studs, and which held behind the coffee tin a small stack of things that had been left there the way the last things always are. A stub of candle, a folded rag, a broken clasp, and underneath all of that, a notebook, soft-covered, the kind made for field notes, with a cover so worn that the cardboard beneath the cloth showed through at the corners. Someone had written on the front cover, in a hand that was precise and careful despite the evident age of the ink, Catalina V. Mis recetas y mis cosas. Catalina's recipes. And her things. Rosario sat down at the table and opened it. It was a recipe notebook. Yes, page after page of dishes written in Doa Catalina's careful hand, with notes in the margins, small adjustments, the names of people who had given her specific ingredients, the years certain things were made, a mole for a wedding in 1963, a bread pudding for a baptism in 1971, a child sauce that had been in the family since her grandmother's time. But between the recipes, threaded through like a second book hidden inside the first, were other entries, observations, memories, small pieces of what a woman notices about the land she has worked for 50 years. And on page 43, between a recipe for peach preserves and a note about the best time to plant corn, Doa Catalina had written something that made Rosario set down her coffee and read it twice. The spring below the creek stone runs year-round. The engineer from the capital who passed through in 1987 said the flow was strong enough to serve 20 families. He wanted to buy the land. I told him the land was not for sale. I wrote this down so whoever comes after me will know the water is real, the water is yours, and anyone who tells you this land is worthless does not know what is underneath it. Rosario sat very still. She read it a third time. Outside, the peach tree's bare branches moved in the morning wind, and the old rocking chair on the porch, which she had not sat in yet, which she had barely noticed, creaked once, as though someone had just gotten up from it. She thought about Licenciado Fuentes and his soft hands and his already signed contract. She thought about the word worthless, which was the word the neighbors had used, and which Hector had not quite said, but had implied with every careful sentence he had spoken at that kitchen table. She thought about 40 acres and a year-round spring, and an engineer from the capital who had tried to buy it 37 years ago. Something in her chest stopped hurting. not because the pain left. Because she understood, for the first time in months, that she had something. It was 2 days later that Don Aurelio and Doa Carmen found her. They were an old couple, in their mid-70s. Rosario guessed, the kind of couple that has been together so long, they have come to resemble each other not in features, but in rhythm, in the way they finished each other's sentences and moved through a doorway. Don Aurelio was the nearest neighbor, his own small rancho a half-mile up the same road, and he had seen the smoke from Rosario's stovepipe 2 mornings in a row and come to investigate, bringing Doa Carmen and a basket that held a round of fresh cheese, a dozen eggs, and a jar of honey from their own bees. "We knew Doa Catalina," Doa Carmen said, setting the basket on the table without ceremony. "The way you do when you are not a guest but a neighbor, and there is a difference. 40 years we were neighbors. She talked about you, you know. Not you by name, she called you Ernesto's wife. She said if Ernesto's wife ever came, we should look after her." Rosario looked at the basket. She looked at the two of them, their worn boots, their patient faces, their complete absence of pity. "She left me the ranch," Rosario said. "We know," said Don Aurelio. "We witnessed the testament." There was a silence. "I don't know much about ranching," Rosario said. Don Aurelio waved his hand. "Nobody does, at first. You learn." That was how it began. Don Aurelio came the following morning to look at the porch roof and told her it needed 2 new support beams, but was otherwise sound. The wood was old growth pine, he said, which was why it had lasted this long, and a house built with old growth pine doesn't give up easily. Doa Carmen came that same afternoon, and together they swept out the main room and beat the mattress, and found in the small back room a cedar chest that Rosario had not opened, which turned out to hold 2 good wool blankets, a set of clay dishes wrapped in an old shawl, and at the very bottom, a small tin of embroidery thread still on its original spools, the colors still bright after who knew how many years. They made coffee that afternoon, and Doa Carmen showed Rosario which wild herbs grew along the creek bed, and which were worth gathering, and which to leave alone. And Don Aurelio explained the fence lines and which of the 40 acres had been used for what in Catalina's time. He pointed out where she had planted corn, where she had kept a small goat pen, where the soil was deepest and richest along the southern slope. He described it the way a man describes something he loves without knowing he loves it, with exact detail, without sentiment, with a care that was itself a form of affection. The morning ritual settled in, almost without Rosario deciding it. She rose before first light, lit the stove, put on the water for coffee. By the time the coffee was ready, Don Aurelio was usually somewhere on the property, checking a fence post, clearing brush from the path to the creek. And Doa Carmen would arrive by mid-morning with something from her own kitchen, a pot of beans, a stack of tortillas wrapped in a cloth, occasionally a jar of something preserved from her garden. They ate together at the table or on the porch, with few words and no performance, the way people eat when they are simply feeding themselves and not managing an impression. On the 4th day, a neighbor from further down the road appeared at the fence. A young woman named Sofa with a baby on her hip and 2 chickens in a wire cage, which she held out to Rosario and said were a gift, because Catalina had always kept chickens and the place needed them. Rosario accepted, without arguing. She set the cage on the porch, and the 2 chickens regarded her with the magnificent indifference of animals who have made no promises to anyone. She found herself laughing, quietly, for the first time in months. That night, alone in the main room, with the stove ticking, and the coyotes calling, and the recipe notebook open on the table, Rosario sat for a long time, without moving. Then she put her head down on her arms and cried. Not theatrically, not for long, But she cried with the particular grief of a woman who has held herself together long enough that the holding has become its own weight, and who has finally found a place where no one needs her to be fine. When she was done, she sat up, dried her face with the corner of her shawl, and turned to the next page in the notebook. It was the page about the peach preserves. She read it through. Then she made a note in the margin, in her own hand, about what month it was and what she was thinking when she read it. On the third day of that first week, Doa Carmen asked if she had found Catalina's notebook. "I found it," Rosario said. "Did you read all of it?" "I read what she wrote about the spring." Doa Carmen nodded slowly. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "She wrote that because she was afraid someone would sell the land without knowing. She made us read it, Aurelio and me. She made us promise that if anyone ever came to buy that land cheaply, we would tell them what was underneath it." Rosario closed her eyes. When she opened them, the afternoon light was coming through the porch door and falling across the recipe notebook on the table and across the old rocking chair where Doa Carmen sat. And for a moment, everything was very still and very clear. "A man came last year," Don Aurelio said from where he stood at the stove, "from a water consortium in Chihuahua, offering to lease the water rights. I told him the land had a new owner and he would have to wait." Rosario looked at him. "He'll come back," Don Aurelio said. He said it plainly, without drama. "When he does, you should know what you have before he tells you what he thinks it's worth." But that night, before the man from Chihuahua came back, Rosario sat alone at the table and read the notebook from the first page to the last. And she found on the back inside cover something she had missed the first time. A note, written smaller than the rest, in a hand that had clearly been tired when it wrote, "The peach tree blooms in March. It has never failed. Not in 50 years. Whatever else fails, the tree blooms." She put her hand flat on the page for a moment. She thought she understood what Doa Catalina had meant. Not just about the tree. Hector came on a Saturday, 3 weeks after Rosario had settled in. He had not called ahead. He drove up the road in his truck and found his mother on the porch with a broom and Doa Carmen shelling beans in the rocking chair. And he stopped at the foot of the porch steps with the expression of a man who expected a different scene and is recalibrating. Licenciado Fuentes was not with him. But he had brought, tucked under his arm, a manila envelope. "Ma'am," he said, "I need to talk to you." "I can see that," she said. She leaned the broom against the wall. "Come sit." He did not sit. He held up the envelope. "There's a company interested in buying the water rights to the creek. They've made an offer. A good one." He paused. "I thought you should know before you made any decisions on your own." Rosario looked at the envelope. She looked at her son. She thought of Licenciado Fuentes' soft hands and the contract already filled out, already signed on his end. "Who told them about the water?" she asked. Hector's jaw tightened slightly. "These things come out. Land in this region, with a year-round water source, people find out." "How much is the offer?" He named a number. It was not a small number. It was the kind of number that, 6 months ago, before she had sat at this table with a notebook in her hands and understood what she was holding, might have made her say yes before she finished reading the page. She was quiet for a long moment. Doa Carmen had not stopped shelling beans. Don Aurelio was somewhere around the back of the house, and they could hear the rhythmic sound of him splitting firewood. "I'm not selling the water rights," Rosario said. "Ma'am, the land is mine. Doa Catalina left it to me. The spring is mine. The 40 acres are mine." She paused. She kept her voice even, the way she had learned to keep it across 62 years of practice. What I do with what is mine to decide. And I've decided. Hector looked at Doa Carmen. Doa Carmen shelled a bean. You can't run this place alone, Hector said. You don't know anything about... I'm not alone, Rosario said. The sound of splitting wood from behind the house was steady and unhurried. Hector stood on the porch steps a moment longer. He had the look of a man waiting to see if the ground is going to shift beneath him. It did not. He put the envelope back under his arm. I'm trying to help you, he said. I know you believe that, she said. Drive safe, Hector. He went back to his truck. He drove back down the road between the mesquite and the dry grass, and the sound of the truck faded into the hills, and the sound of the wood splitting continued, and Doa Carmen finished a handful of beans and let them fall into the bowl. He'll need time, Doa Carmen said. Everyone needs time, Rosario said. She picked up her broom. Some people get it and come around. Some don't. She swept the porch. The mountains in the west were going pink in the late afternoon light. Below in the yard, the bare peach tree stood waiting for March. When spring came to the old Villanueva ranch, it came the way Doa Catalina had promised. First the peach tree, then everything else. The Duraznero bloomed on the second week of March exactly, as though it had a calendar, white blossoms opening in the cold morning air, while the ground was still frosty underfoot. Rosario stood on the porch with her coffee and watched it, and felt something she had not felt in a long time, which was the quiet, particular happiness of being exactly where you are supposed to be. Don Aurelio had repaired the porch roof in November, and he and Doa Carmen had helped her clear the creek bed and find the flat stone. And underneath the flat stone, the spring was exactly what Doa Catalina had said it was. A clean, steady, year-round flow, cold enough to keep your hand in for only a few seconds. A hydrologist from the State Water Authority had come out in February at Rosario's request. And the report he filed confirmed the yield, confirmed the water quality, and noted that the rights to that spring, properly managed, represented a resource of considerable long-term value to the surrounding community. Rosario had made copies of that report. She had kept one and given one to the notary in Nombre de Dios. She had also started baking. Not selling, just baking, the way the notebook taught her. Doa Catalina's bread. Doa Catalina's peach preserves made with the fruit from the tree that had not failed in 50 years. The old chili sauce from the grandmother's time. Doa Carmen brought neighbors to try things. Neighbors brought other neighbors. By the time the peach tree bloomed, the porch on Saturday mornings had become a place where people came. And there was always coffee, and there was always something from the oven. On one of those Saturdays, Doa Carmen set the recipe notebook in its place of honor on the shelf beside the stove, not hidden behind a coffee tin this time, but standing open to the page with the peach preserve recipe where anyone could read it, and said nothing. Just left it there, and Rosario understood without being told what the gesture meant. Thank you, she said, for what you and Aurelio did, for staying. Doa Carmen waved a hand. Catalina asked us to look after her. You are her in the ways that matter. Don Aurelio came in from outside, his boots leaving the particular marks of a man who has been working in good earth. He poured himself a coffee and looked at the notebook open on the shelf and at the bread cooling on the table and at Rosario standing in the kitchen of the old wooden house that everyone had said was worthless. The tree bloomed again, he said. It always does, Rosario said. He nodded. He drank his coffee. Outside, through the open door, the mountain light was coming in golden and warm, and the smell of bread was in the air, and the peach blossoms were coming down from the tree in the yard like slow snow, unhurried, as though they had all the time in the world. Sometimes the worst moments are not an ending. Sometimes they are the only road that leads to the place that was always yours. The place that has been waiting, quietly, faithfully, the way a tree waits for spring. Not every inheritance arrives in a grand house or a large sum. Some arrive as a worn notebook, a flat stone over a creek, a long porch facing the mountains, and two old neighbors who kept a promise to a woman they loved. Has anyone ever believed in you at the exact moment you were starting to doubt your own worth? If this story reached something in your heart, leave your comment below. I'd love to know where you're watching from. Give this story a like, subscribe to Historias Entre Vidas, and ring the bell so you never miss one. Share it with someone who needs a reminder that what looks broken from the outside can hold something unbroken at its center. Until the next story. And in that town above Nombre de Dios, people still say that the old Villanueva ranch smells like peach blossoms and fresh bread on Saturday mornings, and that the woman who lives there never locked the door.